So, what is moral standard? Everyone has a different societies and have different beliefs. Moral standard differ from non-moral standard in a way that moral standard are based in values and norms, while normal moral standards based on taste or preferences. To further explain moral standards are those that are ethical in general moral. So moral standard deals with matters that may benefit or harm people and is not determined by authority. This is just fair, right? So an example of moral standards: people should kill. We should not moral others. We should not lie or nor to cheat or steal. So, non-moral standard, on the other hand, depends on a person if it's right or wrong. It could be based on religion or a culture. So, for example, eating etiquette, some people find it displeasing for a rude to chew their food too loudly, but other culture, it is encouraged to chew food loudly as a form of appreciation for the food. So, non-moral standards are indefined. So, rules that are unrelated to moral or ethical considerations, either these standards are not necessarily linked to morality or by nature lack ethical sense, include rules of etiquette, fashion standards, rules in games, and various house rules. So, this is what defines your morality.
The sixth characteristic of moral standard further differentiated from non-moral standard. Moral standard involves serious or wrong or significant benefits. It is deal with a matter which can seriously impact, injure, or benefit humanity. For instance, following or violating some basketball rules may matter in a basketball game but not necessarily affect one's life or well-being. Moral standard ought to be prepared to the other values. Moral standards have overriding characteristic or homogenic authority. If a moral standard states that a person has moral obligation to do something, he or she is supposed to do that even if it is not conflict with non-moral standard and even with self-interest. Moral standards are not established by authority figure. Moral standard is not invented or formed or generated by authoritative bodies or persons, such as nation legislative body. This value ought to be considered in the process of making law. Moral standards have the trait of universality. In principle, therefore, moral standard cannot be changed nor nullified by a decision of particular authority bodies. One thing about this standard, nothing less, it's that its validity lies on the soundness or adequacy of the reasons that are considered to support and justified by them. Moral standards are based on impartial consideration. Moral standard does not evaluate standard on the basis of the interest of a certain person or group, but one that goes beyond the personal interest to the universal standard point in which each person's interests are impartially counted as one.
This topic will help you to understand the key concepts in philosophy in an incredibly easy way, and so today we will address an important question in ethics. What are moral dilemmas? First of all, let us define the term dilemma before we discuss the nature and dynamics of moral dilemmas. A dilemma is a situation where a person is forced to choose between two or more conflicting options, either of which is acceptable. So we can see, the key here is that the person has choices to make that will all have results she does not want. For example, a town mayor faces a dilemma about how to protect and preserve a virgin forest, and at the same time allow miners and loggers for economic development. In a town, it must be noted, however, that if a person is in a difficult situation but is not forced to choose between the two or more options, then that the person is not in a dilemma. The least that we can say is that the person is just expressing a problematic or distressful situation. This is the most logical thing to do for the person, is to look for alternatives or solutions to address the problem. When dilemmas involve human action, which have moral implications, they are called ethical or moral dilemmas. Moral dilemmas, therefore, are situations where persons who are called moral agents in ethics are forced to choose between two or more conflicting options, neither of which result in the situation in a morally acceptable manner. For example, is it right to save many people if I kill one person? This situation is contrast the morality of murder with the morality of salvation. In such a case, the answer is variable, depending on the situation, personality, and culture, which will combine to put a higher priority on one moral over another. According to Karen Allen, there are three conditions that must be present for situation to be considered moral dilemmas. First, the person or the agent of a moral action is obliged to make a decision about which course of action is best. Here, the moral agent must choose the best option and act accordingly. Second, there must be different courses of action to choose from. Hence, has already pointed out, there must be two or more conflicting options to choose from for moral dilemmas to occur. And third, no matter what course of action is taken, some moral principles are always comprised as means that, according to Allen, there is no perfect solutions to the problem, and for this reason, according to Benjamin Lavastine, in moral dilemmas, the moral agent seems fated to commit something wrong, which implies that she is bound to morally fail because, in one way or another, she will fail to do something which she ought to do. In other words, by choosing one of the possible moral requirements, the person also fails on others. Let's proceed to the different types of moral dilemmas. There are several types of moral dilemmas, but the most common of them are categorized into the following. First, epistemic and tautological dilemmas. Second, self-imposed and world-imposed dilemmas. Third, obligation dilemmas and prohibition dilemmas. And fourth, single agent and multi-person dilemmas. Epistemic moral dilemmas involve situations wherein two or more moral requirements conflict with each other, and that the moral agent hardly knows which of the conflicting moral requirements takes precedence over the other. In other words, the moral agent here does not know which option is morally right or wrong. For instance, I owed the honor my promise to my son to be home early, but in my way home, I saw a sick man who needs to be brought to the hospital. Where does my actual duty? We cannot deny that there are conflicting views here, but we need to know that we want a fuller knowledge of the situation. Is an important purpose being served by me. Getting home early, how serious is the condition of the sick old man? Indeed, I would hardly decide which option is morally right in this situation. However, one option must be better than other. Only it needs fuller knowledge of the situation. Thus the term epistemic moral dilemmas. Tautological moral dilemmas. There are two or more moral dilemmas that conflict with each other, yet neither of these conflicting moral requirements overrides each other. It is not saying that the moral agent doesn't know which moral requirement is stronger than other. The point is that neither of the moral requirements is stronger than the other. Hence, the moral agent can hardly choose between the conflicting moral requirements. For instance, a military doctor is attending the needs of the wounded soldiers in the middle of the war. Unfortunately, two soldiers urgently need a blood transfusion. However, only one bag of blood is available at the moment. To whom shall the doctor administer the blood transfusion? For sure, we could not tell whether administering a blood transfusion to soldier is more moral than administering the blood transfusion to soldier and vice versa. Now, let's proceed to the second category of moral dilemmas, that is self-imposed moral dilemma and world-imposed dilemma. A self-imposed moral dilemma is caused by the moral agent's wrongdoings. For example, David is running for the position of town mayor during the campaign period to promise the indigenous peoples in his community to protect their virgin forests, just to gain their votes. But at the same time, he seeks financial support from a mining corporation. Unfortunately, David won the election, yet he is faced with the dilemma of fulfilling his promise to the indigenous peoples, and at the same time allows the mining corporation to destroy their forests. Indeed, through his own actions, David created a situation in which it's impossible for him to discharge from the obligations. World imposed moral dilemma. Certain events in the world place the moral agent in a situation of moral conflict. For example of this is, during World War II, Sophie was forced to choose which of her two children should go to the gas chamber. Third, obligation and prohibition dilemmas. Obligation dilemma involves one more having one feasible action as obligatory. Example of this is the obligation to stay and protect your mother or to leave her and join the army to serve your country and protect 9 people. Prohibition dilemma. All feasible actions are forbidden. Example, Sophie's choice. If she will not choose one of her kids to go to the gas chamber, both of her children have died. Single agent and multi-person dilemmas. Single agent. The agent of all things considered to do A, of all things considered to do B. And she cannot do both A and B. For example, for instance, a medical doctor found out that her patient has HIV. For sure, the medical doctor may experience tension between the legal requirement to report the case and the desire to respect. Confidential. Although the medical code of ethics acknowledge our obligation to follow legal requirements and to intervene to protect the vulnerable. Multi-person dilemma. On the other hand, the situation is such that one agent ought to do A, a second agent ought to do B, and though each agent can do what he ought to do, it is not possible both for P1 to do A and P2 to do B. For example, a family may be formed between choosing to terminate or prolong the life of a family member. Second example, an organization may have to choose between complying with the wage law by cutting its workforce, or by retaining its current workforce by paying them below the required minimum wage. A moral dilemma is a situation in which a person is torn between right and wrong. A moral dilemma involves a conflict with the very core of a person's principles and values. The choice the person makes may leave him feeling burdened, guilty, relieved, or questioning their values. There are difficulties in arriving at the solutions to the problem of dilemma.
There are 3 levels of moral dilemma. In order to identify the kind of moral dilemma, it is important to know who will be affected by the decisions made in the situation. The first level of moral dilemma is the personal moral dilemma. It is experienced by a person which challenges his priorities or values. In this situation, you can resolve this moral dilemma in your own. Next is the second level of moral dilemma, which is organizational level. It refers to ethical cases encountered and resolved by social organizations, business, medical, field, and sector. In this situation, they can resolve it with the help of people. Last is the structural moral dilemma. Take note, it is broader than organizational level. Why? Because these ethical standards are general or universal. It is applicable to all who are within the system. In this situation, there are 3 or more institutions needed to resolve this moral dilemma. Next is the moral development of Colbridge. Colbridge creates 3 levels of moral development, and it consists 6 stages. The 3 levels are pre-conventional, conventional, and post-conventional. According to him, by using children responses to a series of moral dilemmas, he established that the reasoning behind the decision was a greater indication of moral development than the actual answer. But take note, it is only a theory of Colbridge. It is in our hand if we will believe in his theory.
Foundation of morality. Freedom, responsibility for one's acts and to others. Foundation of morality. Freedom, responsibility for one's and to others. Morality of human acts. The nature of man and its dignity. When we say nature of man and its dignity, it refers to a will, something, and to know beforehand. A man or a person cannot choose or act until he is aware of which good is better. When a person decides to act in accordance with his or her beliefs, he or she is doing freely. It is capable of acting free that we call the human acts. So, the question is, when is man free in his actions? Okay, let me answer this question. I think to be free in our action is to accept full responsibility for the consequence of our action or even our decision. we don't always see the long-term consequences of our action, especially when we're young. But make no mistake, accepting responsibility, both personal and indirect, is a big part of gaining people's respect and admiration. In the long run, we shape our lives and we shape ourselves. The process never ends until we die, and the choices we make are ultimately our own responsibility. In Nature of Freedom, it is proceed from the intellect and will. The will was guided by a reason. Man is free when he makes his choices, responsible for his action because he is aware of what he is doing, why he is doing it, and how he is going about it. Okay, now let's talk about human acts versus act of man. When we say human acts, it is an action taken by the agent or a man consciously and freely, and the essential qualities or components of human activities. A human act is when a person uses their intelligence and willpower to do something, by possessing the information, freedom, and voluntaries to do so. The person is able to discern the decision. Man takes into responsibility of these actions. While acts of man, on the other hand, are actions that do not involve full use of one's intellect and do not occur as a result of deliberation. It's done without anyone's permission or knowledge, and it's done without warning. Acts of sensation, the uses of one's senses. Acts of appetition, acts of sensation, the uses of one's senses. Acts of appetition, bodily tendency such as digestion. Acts of delirium, and acts when one is sleeping are all examples of man's action that are not within one's control. When these factors, ignorance, passion, fear, aggression, and habits, are present, an act is regarded as man-made. There are some acts that not really morally accountable. First is the acts of person asleep or under hypnosis. Some hypnotized people express feelings of detachment or profound relaxation, while others say that their activities appear to happen without their conscious consent. Second is reflex, where the will has no time to intervene. A reflex action, often known as a reflex, is an instinctive, virtually immediate response to a stimulus. When someone accidentally touches a hot object, they instinctively jerk their hand away. A reflex does not require any input from the mind. Last one is an act of performed under serious physical violation, and the examples are a hostage to do an evil action, and it is not a moral act that can be judged because the will is restrained.
Minimum requirement for morality, reason, and impartiality. What is reason? The word logic means the capacity for making sense of things by applying common sense, a logic to the world in the way justify changing practices, institution, and beliefs. Based on existing for new information, it is the basis or motive for an action, decision, or conviction. An explanation of why an action or decision was right or wrong. Why is reason important? Moral deliberation is a matter of weighing reasons and being guided by them. Truth in ethics entails being justified by good reasons. In the absence of sensible rationale, they are merely capricious and ignorable. That is, the rightful moral decision and involves selecting the option that has the power of reason on its side. What is impartiality? The principle of proportionality or fairness is the belief that decisions should not be made on the basis of bias, prejudice, or reference for one person over another for improper reasons, also called as even-handedness and fair-mindedness. It is the attempt to ensure that all people are considered equally and fairly. Why is impartiality important? It assumes that every person is equally important, that no one person is seen as intrinsically more significant than anyone else. For example, because of his or her political or social standing or popularity. Reason and impartiality. Moral judgment is true if it is exposed by better reason than the alternatives. If someone tells us that a certain action is immoral, we may ask, why it says so? And if there is no reasonable answer, we discard the proposition as absurd. Thus, reason is a necessary requirement for morality.